All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can listen to me. I hope I'm visible to all of you. My name is Varun Satia, and I am pleased to welcome you to this next season of Kraftshala Live. We're going to be talking about how to drive adoption for new brands. Just give me a second to share my screen. Super. So I hope that you can see my screen. A little bit of a little bit of personal context here. So I've been down with what I presume is a viral for the last couple of days. So if you see my energy dipping a little bit in the session, please, I'll apologize in advance for it. Before any one of you asks, I have gone for a COVID test and I'm awaiting results as of right now. Yeah, so I had the test this morning. But let's come back to the context at hand. The reason I'm talking to you today is because I lead a company called Kraftshala, which is India's premier marketing and sales training platform. Just Kraftshala Live itself has crossed over 40,000 subscribers recently. So we've been pretty much doubling our subscriber base every single quarter, and all thanks to you guys for coming up and showing interest in these topics, which has been the encouragement for us to release more and more sessions of ours online. A little bit of product updates before I go forward. Sorry guys, just give me a second. Yeah, so a little bit of product updates as well. The Marketing Launchpad, which is our program for entry-level marketing roles. Applications of that close tomorrow. So in case you're interested in that, it's a great program for you to apply. You don't have to pay anything upfront for the program, and we've already sort of rolled out offers to a small number of students based on the first screening test. So you can give that a shot. For those of you who are in managerial roles already or aspire to go there, the professional brand management in the digital age, which is now our largest program as of this year. The applications of that are going to open in first week of November. Now, a lot of you have already applied for that, and unfortunately, our sales team is been a little bit busy in terms of reaching out. So you'll probably find that there is a little bit of delay in them reaching out. We'd love it to be a couple of days, but essentially it's taking more time right now. Yeah. So if you apply, if you do a get notified today, you'll probably hear a ring back likely next week. And applications obviously open for that in the first week of November. B School students, we still have some time for it there, and we'll come and we'll pick the top 5 students in the batch as we typically tend to do. All right, so today's topic is going to be about, as I said, is about building penetration, and we're going to be talking about 3 things. We're going to be talking about the audience and the product, and essentially the interlinking between the two. We're going to be talking about what kind of communication tends to work well in a context like penetration, and we will, if we get some time, we're going to be talking about media as well. My personal sense is that media as a topic deserves much larger bandwidth, so we'll probably do sessions on media. That's my sense, but if I get time on it, I'll talk about it. Otherwise, I'll talk about it on the Kraftshala Instagram and YouTube channels, right? So that's what we'll do today. We'll focus on audience, product, and communication, right? So let's talk a little bit about audience. Most new brands fail. If you look at if you look at any data, the reality that most products are failing. Some numbers say it's 50%, some numbers say it's 95%. I think it's closer to the 95% number than the 50% number. But essentially, brands come in and brands go in, and a lot of brands that brand builders put a lot of effort in also end up failing. Yeah, and it's the one where you have thought a fair bit about the problem, where you do think that you have a solution that is a perfect solution for your users, that tends to pinch in a lot more, right? So I'm going to be speaking a lot more about that context. But I thought I'll show you a little bit about how typically people tend to feel once their product sort of is not working. There's a fair amount of frustration that comes in, and I thought that a 10-second video would be a good way to kick things off. So have a listen to this.
पैसे लगे, जज्बा लगा, दिल लगा, और इस सब के बावजूद हमें क्या मिला? दुख, फरेब, धोखा, क्यों?
Okay, so dukh, फरेब, धोखा, क्यों? Yeah, I mean, the thing is, most brands are failing, and they're failing for more than one reason. But there is, and while we can't account for everything, we can account for many things that don't make you feel dukh, fareb, and dhokha after you have launched your brand, right? So just give me a second.
पैसे लगे.
Yeah, so one way to sort of figure out what you should be doing is to try and avoid things that you shouldn't be doing, right? So Charlie Munger has made this technique quite famous. Instead of looking at instead of when you're trying to solve for complex problems, instead of asking the question of what will it take to succeed, the more useful question to ask sometimes is how do people fail, and how do I avoid those failures, and then automatically what is left is success, right? So you're just simply inverting the question that is out there. And so there are two reasons why it's hard to get new brands off the track. The first is that it's hard to get people to hear about new products. If you really think about it, how do people discover new products, right? Either it is that either their friends tell them, or when they're reading something, it just pops up in their thing, or when they're watching something. That's about it, right? That's the only way that people really discover new products. So it's pretty hard to sort of discover new products. And even when people discover products, it's hard to get them to try it. Most of us are very comfortable with the kind of solution that we have. Even if they're suboptimal solutions, we are still very comfortable with them, right? So it's hard for people. It's not in most people's nature to try out new products. Let me just put it that way. And so, and this is not just, by the way, like it can vary a little bit by the category, but the dominant majority of people are happy with the solution that they have been using, right? So in that sense, these are the two reasons why the two reasons why brands fail. And the two questions are interconnected. They're not independent questions. Because it is hard for a lot of people, because it's hard to convince a lot of people to try out new products. If you can find the people who are likely to try your products in the first place, then it might be easier for you to reach out to them, essentially, right? So if I were to just do a very simple split of any audience for any brand, there are those people who can be convinced, there are those people who can't be convinced, and then there are most people who are not really paying attention. And to be honest, this is a pie chart, which is a very standard pie chart, but it doesn't really represent reality, in the sense that the percentages are not representing reality. For any new brand, the actual percentage of people who can be convinced are much smaller than what is visually represented here. But just as a reference framework, I think it sort of does the trick, that it is able to sort of give us an indication that most people are either not paying attention or cannot be convinced. Which is why when you're building a new brand, you're best served by talking to people, exclusively talking to people who can be convinced, right? And this simple idea that most people are completely and utterly uninterested in your product can help you sort of make some very hard choices that are actually in reality not very hard choices at all, right? So I'll just give you a couple of examples of just how well this technique has been applied by a couple of brands who have literally transformed the 21st century thus far, right? And the way they've done it essentially is that they have first tapped into what we call the convertibles, that audience right in the center, which is most likely to be open to using your product. And then they have expanded the base a little bit to other segments as you go along, right? So it's not so much about appealing to everyone at one go. It is about finding out what it is, who is most likely to consume a new brand or a new product, and therefore then the subsequent questions of how do I reach them, right? So I'm going to give you two fairly contrasting examples, both of them from the US. The first one happens to be one of the biggest brand wins of the 21st century. And when I say the biggest, I mean things that impact our lives in a very substantial way. Does anyone want to take a guess about what I'm talking? Anyone want to take a guess about what brand I'm referring to here? There is a 10-second lag because I'm using StreamYard to stream it on YouTube and LinkedIn. So in case you feel a lag, just sort of bear with that. Anyone want to take a guess about what brand I'm talking to here? Okay, so Ketan says Facebook, PNG. Arvind says Apple. Shubham says Tesla. That's interesting. Rahul says Trump. That's also interesting. Starbucks is also there. Actually, Starbucks is a very interesting one as well. So I'll tell you what. Amongst these answers, there is the right answer. Essentially, the first example that I'm giving you is of Trump. So if you look at Trump, essentially, the 2020 elections are nigh upon us. Most of you would be, I think, broadly aware that elections are happening very soon, or specifically on the 3rd of November. But these elections are not as interesting from a marketing standpoint as the 2016 election, when Trump defeated not just the Democratic contender, but within his own Republican Party, there were over 17 or 18 contenders for the presidential nomination that year. So unlike India, in the main two political parties in the US, there are democratic elections that happen for both parties. So people who are affiliated to a party actually vote, and the person who gets, essentially speaking, the most number of votes or the most number of delegates actually goes on to represent the nomination. So it's a fairly democratic process. And that year, there were maybe about 17 or 18 incumbents. It included everyone in the Conservative Party that you can think of, right? It included people who were big on the conservative side, such as Ted Cruz. I don't want to bore you with names here, but there were people who were backed by industry. There were people who were backed by the religious side. There were people like Jeb Bush, who happens to be the younger brother and son of former presidents. Had raised $100 million even before the campaign started. And here was this guy who clearly looked like a buffoon and had been looking like a buffoon for years and years before it. And to a lot of us in India, the election is still incomprehensible. But I can assure you that it is even more incomprehensible to a lot of people in the US who were based in the cities, and I couldn't believe that someone like that had gotten elected. But there was a mastery in play, at least in persuasion. And Trump, who had spent all his time in TV, essentially understood what it takes to survive in a competitive environment. So when the race is between 17 or 18 people and not one-on-one, there are very specific ways that you need to win it, right? You don't have to be the number one player from day one, or you don't have to be the preference of majority from day one. You simply need to have a certain loyal base that you can potentially expand into more voters, right? So this is how he started. Even before the campaign, he had gone after Obama in every way that was possible. Obama is the previous president for the US, and so he was the founder of the birther controversy, and a fair number of controversies he had sort of egged upon. So a lot of people who hated the former president then had already sort of heard of him, had developed an affinity for him. As the campaign got closer, his first attempt was to between the Obama haters and the nationalists, the people, nationalists, hyper nationalists, some would say even nativists, that's where the closest overlap lay, right? So that was the easiest way in which that was the easiest audience within the electorate that he could sort of tap into. And that's when he talked about, I'll build the wall on the border with Mexico. You might have heard of that. Or that I'll ban all Muslims coming into the country. You might have heard of that, right? So there was a fair amount of nationalist tone to the entire campaign, and that got him to maybe about 15 to 16% of the Republican voter base. And then from there, once he had that base, he started going after all the established politicians. And this is where the campaign sort of really took a mainstream look, because he projected himself, ironically, just as Obama had done 8 years ago, as someone who was outside the establishment. And when I say establishment, I mean the political class of the United States. He was not a career politician. He spent all his time in business. Everyone else there had risen through the political ranks. And so he used that against them, because like in India, no one's really happy with their political class. So that's always that's always a way to the voters' heart. And then as he got closer to the nomination, and as he sort of started to talk more against, as he started to compete directly against Hillary, that's when he sort of broadened his base further to economic, to people who were suffering from wage stagnation and economic worries and so on and so forth, right? So it was a very, very strategically delivered campaign. And at no point did you think that he's going to get enough number of votes to actually win, which is why, even though he's so far behind Biden right now in polling, everyone is wary that, look, we can't make a prediction, because we couldn't see a way that this guy would go in, and that he did it. If it is not clear by now, I'm simply talking about Trump as a I'm not talking about his policies at all. I'm simply looking at it from a marketing lens. But if you want something closer to the business world, there is another example which is there, and this example also, this person whose quote I'm just going to show you, also happens to be one of the greatest marketing minds of this century, right? Of the current century, as at least of the first 20 years, right? He's one of the most remarkable people in the world right now. And here's the interesting part. He funded one of the companies. You associate with him today with one of those companies, and he wrote a blog on the company's page in 2006, a publicly available blog, where he detailed essentially why he was associated with the said company and what they were planning to do. Okay, I'm going to show you the quote, and then I'm going to let you guess what is the name of the person and the company that we're talking about. So I want you to pay attention. Essentially, ignore this line and pay attention to, so in short, the master plan is, and then he went on, build a sports car, use that money to build an affordable car, use that money to build an even more affordable car. While doing above, also provide zero emission electric power generation options, and don't tell anyone. Anyone want to know what the company is? I think I have already mentioned this one. This is Elon Musk talking about Tesla in 2006, right? So the plan the plan for Tesla was already there. At least the broad direction was already set in from day one, right? If you want to build in an affordable electric car, then you're not going to be able to succeed the way that you're not going to be able to succeed the way that GM or Toyota had gone about their business, right? You had to take in a very sharp strategy, which is first to build a sports car, right? An expensive sports car that also happens to be really really aspirational for a lot of people. Then use that to build a more affordable car. Then use that to build an even more affordable car. The ST, I think, is about $35,000 in the US. And then while doing that, also provide zero emission electric power generation options, right? Which he's also been doing. Now, the interesting part here is the fact that is the order in which he's gone about it as well, right? Because Elon Musk had already sold PayPal at that point, so he had some funds available. Obviously, he was also involved with SpaceX at that point, but you could bet that he had the money to sort of go to raise and go after the affordable car market from day one. But the thing is that it's not just a difficult proposition to build a product like that, which is both, which is both electric part as well as delivering on a lot of consumer needs of an affordable car segment. It's not just that it is a difficult product to deliver at that price range. It is also something which it is also something which uh, follows the law of marketing, which is that if you have if you, instead of going after all convertible candidates, if you choose to go after slightly more influential convertibles, then the word of mouth allows you to go after other other parts of the audience in a much more easy fashion, right? If you can if the advocates of your brand in the initial stages also happen to be highly influential in their community, then that's always a huge advantage. Which is why when we're talking about building a sports car, it builds aspiration for not just people who can afford a car like that, but everyone else who's also potentially a car consumer, right? So in that sense, it makes people wait for it, and as the company scales, the brand sort of remains in place, and so therefore it's easy for him to scale it at the pace at which he's been able to scale it, right? So in that sense, when you're talking about penetration, when you're talking about brand penetration, it is important to figure out who the most influential convertible audience of your product is, and that's usually essentially not not something that you can. I mean, you have some ideas, and you need to have some ideas if you're starting a car company, but in most cases, if you're building a product which is not as expensive to build, you have the option to actually work that as you go forward, right? So in that sense, the right way to go about it is always to tap first the convertibles and then expand the base. This is something that we've implemented in Kraftshala as well. So I can speak from personal example that when we were starting our first program of marketing training in 2017, we didn't really know how to train very well as a start, right? Because we knew marketing, we didn't really know how to sort of build programs that were that were a good way for people to learn. So our first goal was like like any product builder, was to make sure that that we took in small goals and we delivered on that really well, right? And so we thought, well, why don't we build, instead of a 5-month program, let's just build a 5-week program and launch it in a few campuses, which happen to be the top 6 IIMs and FMS and ISB and so on and so forth. And then we expanded it to other business schools, and then we thought, okay, now we're ready, let's build a program for working professionals. And then we said, all right, now that this is done, let's build a full-time program and let's build something for entry-level marketing roles, right? So it's very much been that journey for us as well personally, as we as we sort of expand the base. The one thing that you have to keep in mind is that, is that this also allows you to get a better shot at user delight, because at the end of the day, most people are going to be working with your. Most people are going to be trying you out if they're desperately in need of your product, right? So Kunal Shah, who's the founder of Freecharge and Cred, he has this very famous concept of Delta 4, in which he basically says that, look, the new product that you build as a startup needs to be better. It needs to be, in his words, more efficient than existing solutions by a factor of 4, right? And so if that is there, then people want your product. No one wants to go back after an existing solution. So an example that he takes, for instance, is we used to have Meru cabs, and then we had Uber and Ola, right? And once people start using Uber and Ola, no one is really going back to Meru, because it's just a more efficient system. It's much better consumer value which is out there, right? But the thing is that when you're trying to build a product like that, it's not always easy to delight all kinds of users at all times, right? And so therefore, go back to the Elon Musk example, you can build an electric car that is amazing, but probably at the scale at which you're building it today, it is going to be an expensive car. And so therefore, if you can remove the barrier of price initially, that's a huge thing, right? Because I don't need to worry about getting it down to $35,000. Even if it is $70,000, $90,000, $100,000, there are people who can still buy it, right? So in that sense, the sharper my audience is, the more chances I get to delight it. And what I can do with a $75,000 or $90,000 car is very different, right? I can do a lot more with it. I can really go ahead and build user delight. And as I scale it up, obviously I understand what it takes to build a car company, and so therefore it becomes easier, right? So in that sense, you'll have to keep in mind that yes, it is essential to build user delight, and B, if you go with a sharper audience, it allows you to do it much better, and your chances improve much more. Now, this also has an implication on the kind of consumer testing that typically happens, right? So if any of you are working in consumer brands right now, you would potentially be how do I put it? You'd potentially be doing consumer testing where let's say you work in a food company, right? You'd have a blind taste test which would be going on, and that taste test essentially would be with a random set of consumers, right? And you'll have a certain metric within the company saying that if 60% of your consumers say that this is better than whatever is your reference, then that product is good enough to be launched in the market, right? But the reality is that your product does not have to, I mean, once you do that kind of testing, it takes into account not just the convertible audience, but everyone in the picture, right? And that's what makes this kind of consumer testing flawed. That's why people like Seinfeld and Steve Jobs were always against a lot of consumer testing of new products, at least of radical products, because they felt that, look, these group discussion kind of researches are just not an indication of whether a product is going to succeed or not, right? Famously, iPod was not a hit amongst initial audiences. Famously, Seinfeld's first pilot show didn't really resonate with the audience, right? And they were still sort of pushed ahead. But this is what happens essentially, right? Because initially products have to be sort of created for a certain convertible audience, and that creates a complication that if you don't know who exactly is going to be convertible, sometimes you have to take that gut and go forward. Although I will tell you that gut is always not a great idea as well. I personally, I was part of the sales team, and one of the marketing managers had come in, and I was a management trainee at that point. I was doing my sales stint, and they'd launched this new chocolate, which had come in like a few days before the actual launch event, and it tasted quite bad, yeah. And so the marketing manager was coming in and he was doing his spiel that, look, this is why we've launched it, and this is why you should go out and push it in the market, and so on and so forth. And then someone in the audience who was part of the sales team, obviously, raised their hand, and at that point the company was still fairly hierarchical in that there was a lot of respect that was given to people who would come in from the head office. So the question was phrased as, these products that we are launching, do we actually test them with consumers before we launch them, right? And everyone who was sitting in that room from the sales team knew what he was referring to, right? Because everyone who tasted it thought, look, we cannot be pushing this to the market. This does not seem to be, this doesn't seem to be worth it. And then our marketing manager, with all the confidence in the world, replied, look, I don't think that consumers know what they want. I know what they want. I'm going after the, just like Steve Jobs said that, consumer testing doesn't matter. I'm going the same way. I'm taking this bet, right? And that's something that I will tell you that, it's easy to quote Steve Jobs, not so easy to live up to his expertise on consumer products, right? That time, perhaps they should have done consumer testing at that point, right? Because it would have probably showed them that the product sucks. But so there is a little bit of complication, and I don't want to simplify this issue by just saying that consumer testing sucks. It's just flawed. And so if you're going to launch radical concepts, then you're better off knowing what kind of audience you want to test it with. So just for the marketing launchpad, it's again a radical concept, but we did months of concept testing. But obviously we have to then take a considered call on whether this is going to succeed or not, right? Now, once you have an idea of the audience, there are a couple of things you can do before you get into communication that can help you improve your chances of success, right? And this is particularly useful for products which are essentially FMCG in nature, or or consumer tech in nature as well. So an Instagram or a LinkedIn would sort of come in there as well. And essentially, what a sharper audience allows you to do is also to cue a clear occasion to build a habit, right? Now, it's not to say that you can't build an habit for wider audiences, but I'll tell you why a sharper audience is useful in this case. So this is something that I'm taking from Charles Duhigg, who's written a very well-read and well-received book called The Power of Habit. If you haven't read this, I'd strongly urge you to sort of go ahead. He wrote this, I think, about 15 years ago. So therefore, the example that you see here is of an email that is coming on a BlackBerry. And basically, what the essential idea behind the book is the fact that all of us are largely working through habits, and habits are deeply ingrained in our brains, right? We're essentially operating through habits. So we might think as if we're taking decisions, but actually we're just going through habits. And a habit has three aspects to it, or three elements to it. One is a cue. So for instance, you have a phone, that phone rings for whatever reasons. And as soon as there is that noise that tells you that there is a new notification, you open, in this case, you open your email, and when you open that email, your curiosity is sort of assuaged, and therefore you get that emotional reward that, oh, okay, at least I've read this, right? And reward in this case is best understood as that emotional satisfaction, right? And obviously, if you want to understand this better, just imagine getting a notification and not touching your phone at that point, right? It's unlikely that you are going to be it's unlikely that you're going to be sitting neatly in your seat throughout. So in that sense, the reward is an emotional in nature, and over a period of time, as this happens a few times at least, a craving starts to build in, right? So immediately that you get a notification, now you want that reward in, right? And so therefore, the same thing happens for a whole host of products, right? So for instance, you wake up in the morning, you're groggy, you haven't slept perhaps the best, or even if you have slept, there is still that buzziness in your head. And then typically, to get rid of that buzziness, you drink any beverage, coffee, tea, whatever it is, and then you get that hit of mental stimulation. And now every time you feel that grogginess in your mind, you want that cup of tea or cup of coffee, right? Which is why a brand like Nescafe, for instance, would want that cup of beverage to be Nescafe, right? So instead of drinking tea, if they can get you to start associating that morning grogginess with coffee, then that's something that is likely to trigger a lot of growth for them, right? That's how essentially habits build in. If you're interested in the concept of habits, I'll also recommend Need's books, who's written a little bit more about variable rewards that are more relevant for consumer tech. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because habits essentially allow you to tap into audiences in a way such that you're actually going to build a sustainable business, right? Because if you do not associate habitual consumption with respect to a product that's supposed to be consumed frequently, you are going to lose that audience very, very quickly, right? Which is why if you look at some of the recent, or even if you not just recent, but many campaigns of Nescafe, you'll find that essentially there is a clear queuing of morning that is being that is happening in a lot of campaigns. Nescafe is one example, but even Nescafe's competitors would be doing pretty much the same thing. But the practice is more common than you think, right? And Mondelez is one company which owns the Cadbury brand, is one company which does a lot of this as well. So they would have stuff like Subaka biscuit, which is clearly cueing that this is a biscuit that you're supposed to have with your morning milk tea, whatever it is that you're having. And even something like Boneville, for that matter, right? Which is a dark chocolate, not something that is that's highly consumed in India. And essentially, the way that they've been trying to build penetration is by saying that this is the perfect way to end your day, right? So because Boneville typically goes to an audience which is a little more well off, a little, most of that audience is working, and so it's a way for people to sort of treat themselves at the end of a hard day. Yeah. And so that's why a lot of bone meal consumption or a lot of dark chocolate consumption would anyways happens towards the later part of the day, and that's something that the brand is tapping into, right? So habits is something which is fairly common. Not every, just by saying habits, you can't really sort of build a new habit. So there has to be obviously a rootedness in consumer truth. So for instance, if dark chocolate consumption is not happening at night, then this kind of communication doesn't work at all. But if it is, then that's something that you can make something of, right? Now, the other interesting thing, if you've seen a lot of Nescafe communication, and I'm picking Nescafe as a brand because I had talked about it in an earlier session, and it's a brand that a lot of people are familiar with. If you notice the typical Nescafe ads, you will notice that the audience that they tend to show in their communication, whether those are creatives on TV or on digital, social, whatever it is, they tend to show audiences of these three kinds, right? Either they are showing students who have recently joined college and are spending their time outside, or you're showing people who are in their first jobs and are trying to make it there, or there would be a couple who've recently settled into their home, right? Can anyone figure out what's common amongst these three audiences, like apart from the fact that they're broadly in that 18 to 30-year-old zone? But is there a commonality that you can see here? All right. While you're answering this question, let me address Priya's question. Priya asked me, product testing happens on target customers. How is it flawed? How is it flawed then? Well, essentially, it is flawed because most people's choices of a product are dependent upon the fact that what people around them are using and what people around them are thinking about it, right? So the reason group level testing often fails is because it fails to account for that social context, right? You may taste you may taste a new you might taste Red Bull and think that, oh, this is a sucky drink, but suddenly three people around you who happen to be cool people are also drinking Red Bull, and now your perception of Red Bull has changed altogether, right? Because you're like, okay, let me give this another shot. Now you drink it 3 times, you drink it 4 times, Red Bull suddenly does not taste as bad as it tasted on the first go, right? Because it's a drink that, like any beverage, it takes some getting used to, right? And so in that sense, a product that would have failed in consumer testing day in and day out, like Red Bull, can actually succeed in the real world, right? So in that sense, if you have a radical product, then consumer testing becomes a very complicated piece, because people are really telling you what they think they're going to do, but in reality their decisions are going to be shaped a lot by the social and emotional context. So that's one reason why it fails. The other reason is that when you've not picked the right audience itself, right? So if, for example, you take out a product, you think that it's going to appeal to audience X, but in reality it appeals to a different audience Y itself that you've not thought of when you're launching, therefore it's not there in your concept testing, but actually it is appealing a lot to an audience Y. So in that sense, then again, consumer testing can become complicated, and that happens again a lot, when you launch a certain product and you don't really know why it is that it is succeeding. So Instagram is a great example, right? Instagram, one of the features of Instagram was photo sharing. It wasn't the entire piece, and when they launched it, they didn't realize just how powerful that was until much later. So in that sense, consumer testing can be a little bit of a challenge. All right, now a few people have, it's a good question, please keep asking this. A lot of people have answered this one: disruptions, new beginnings, transitions. You're absolutely right? These are times of transition essentially which are happening, right? All these three situations are essentially transitions where people have transitions from either school to college to a new job, or personal singlehood to a married life, right? And the reason that transitions are so useful is are for brand builders who are trying to build penetration, is because people tend to evaluate a lot of their brand choices at that time in particular, right? So and this is particularly useful for any habit based product, right? So take something like toothpaste, right? The toothpaste that you're going to be using today, most likely, or today, will for many years would have been the toothpaste that you were using as a child, because that's what you got used to, right? That's what was being used in your parents' house, right? Now, when does someone make a decision for toothpaste? It's probably when they've shifted away from home for the first time, or at least have a lot more exposure, right? Which is where Close Up comes in, right? So it has a much younger audience than the mothers and the parents that Colgate speaks to. And similarly, when it comes to Sensodyne, it's a great occasion that they've identified as well, because it's the first time that someone feels any kinds of sensitivity in their gums in any way, that they realize that, oh, actually they might be in for a little bit of trouble. So at least they should change that toothpaste to avoid visiting a dentist as much as possible, right? So in that sense, again, that the first time that you face any kind of tooth trouble, you might want to look at Sensodyne again, right? And this is something which is this is something which is useful for whole host of brands. If you're a marketplace for old phones, when are users most likely going to use you? It is when they are in search of a new phone, right? Because that's when they can exchange the old. That's when they have a need of exchanging the old for the new, right? Or it could be around their birth. It could be around their birthdays, right? They want to buy themselves a new phone, but first they have to get rid of the old phone, which is where the platform essentially comes in use, right? So tapping users in times of transition gives you a great leg up when you're talking to users for the first time. If you can figure out when is someone likely to be most open to changing a brand, that's the time that you want to hit them out, right? And this is something that I've realized is much more prevalent than what I had realized before. So if you see a lot of ads on these typical big boss like shows, you would see that a lot of ads involve the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, right? Imagine a detergent ad, right? Mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. The new daughter-in-law has come in and she has her own views, and the mother-in-law has her own views, and the detergent essentially brings them together in some way or the other, right? What's happening there? It's again that transition, because a lot of brand choices get made when the woman enters into her married household, and that's traditionally been the case, right? And so that's why when you're trying to get people to adopt your brand, it's better off that you figure out what is that moment of transition that will really work for you. Now, let me come to the second half of this session, which is really about communication, right? And if you want to know the broad concept here, the broad concept is you need to build fame by owning a distinctive truth, right? There's no rocket science here whatsoever. Being perceived as famous, being perceived as big and popular is a goal for any campaign, right? Anytime you do a brand campaign, you want to be seen as this popular brand. But it is especially important for a new brand to be seen as big and popular, because the reality is that when you have a new brand, there is absolutely no, it's like an object which is sitting on a table without any momentum, right? It's literally inertia there, right? It's not enough to just sort of push it a little, right? You want a little bit of momentum, because initially it's going to take a little bit of movement for that cycle to really start happening, and for some kind of movement to really happen, right? So you're looking for more than just base level awareness. You're looking to be seen as popular and to be seen as famous amongst at least the audience that you've identified, which is why, by the way, the Cred campaign has worked to a large extent, right? If you look at some of the marketing experts have criticized the Cred campaign, you notice that there is a commonality to it, and I'll tell you, in fact, it's part of my framework, right? Why there seem to be initially something missing with the campaign, but the reality is that for any new brand which is trying to build penetration, the first and foremost thing is to be talked about. the first and foremost thing is to be actually be a part of the conversation, right? And in Cred's specific case, and I'll tell you why its case is specifically, that in of itself is enough, right? For most other brands who operate in a slightly more competitive scenario, they need to do a little bit more than just talked about. But at least at least in the case of Cred, this in of itself is great, and I think that this is going to be counted as one of the massive successes of 2020. Right, and you would, if you're watching IPL, as you might be doing, it's 7:30, so there is obviously a match going on right now as well. But if you're watching IPL, you'd see a lot of brands advertising who are using endorsers, but a large number of them actually happen to be fairly new brands, right? And it's not just this IPL, because a lot of other brands have been hit. It's also because new brands in particular use celebs to indicate that they're big and popular, right? And this is something which has been going on for a fair bit of time and is likely to continue as well, right? So when you're building a campaign like that, there are three things that you need to keep in mind, right? Two of them I'm going to share with you right up front, which is that number one, you want to keep the brand launch communication rooted in a distinctive brand truth, right? And this is, I think, more important when you are launching a brand which on the face of it does not have that level of distinctiveness. So for instance, what is the competitor to Cred, right? It's a very hard question to answer because there isn't a similar product in the market whatsoever. But if you were to launch a diaper tomorrow, there are tons and tons of diapers out there, right? If you were to launch an online course tomorrow, there are millions of online courses out there. And so in that sense, most brands have to fight a battle that Cred did not have to, which is answer the question of what is the distinctive brand truth that they are bringing to the table. The other piece, and this is related to the first piece, is that you need to make sure that that truth is presented in the relevant emotional context, which basically means that it has to speak to the needs of the user, not just from a functional point of view, but from an emotional point of view as well. And most brands get one right or the other right. It's actually pretty rare for a brand to get both of these things right. And just from the communication that you would have been seeing over the last 3 or 4 weeks, let me give you an example of a brand that got one right and then the other that got the other right? So this is the first example is for Lenko. Have a look. Okay, did that do anything for you? It certainly answered the question of why I should be using for Lenko. But from an emotional need of the consumer, like if I see this ad 2 or 3 times, I'll probably want to, I'll probably want to get it out of my mind as quickly as possible, right? Because it doesn't seem to address any of the emotional needs of any human being, right? Most people want to watch everyone, not most people, want to watch content. Sometimes some of that content is ads, right? So it's okay if I'm being forced to watch this campaign, and this video, by the way, has over 8.5 million views on YouTube, but and most of that is basically people being forced to watch this campaign, right? You can imagine that only the most desperate people are going to be watching this and everyone else is just going to be skipping this if they have the option, right? Then this is a campaign that a lot of you would have seen a lot of it, especially if you've been watching the IPL. So have a look at this one.
अरे हाथ को तो नहीं लगी?
20 रुपए दे।
किस बात के?
भाई बॉल खोने के।
पकड़ सकता था वो।
भाई बॉल उसको छुई नहीं, छूटी तो वो देता, अब नहीं छुई तो तू देगा ना।
नहीं है यार।
मुझे पता था नहीं है, जा घर से लेके।
Dream 11.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of Dream 11 advertising which is happening right now, and you can see that they've gotten they've gotten this part fairly accurate, right? I mean, you can clearly see that the personality of the brand has really come really come out really well. It speaks to anyone who likes cricket and has played gully cricket. This is a situation which should be very common and very funny, but there is zero distinctive brand truth that is coming out there, which is okay if you're cred, as I said, when there isn't an obvious competitor that is out there, and so therefore you might just try it because you don't know what the product is. But in a case like this, where there are actually lots and lots of similar products that are out there, you're actually sort of wasting a lot of money, and Dream 11 has raised a lot of money, so they can afford to waste a lot of money. But a lot of us who are not part of that kind of an equation, this is not the best way to sort of use it at all, right? So in that sense, you'd be better served if you were to take care of both of these points, right? And let me give you an example of a brand which has taken into account both of these things as well. There's also a campaign that's been on quite frequently over the last couple of weeks. Have a look.
यह है शर्मिले शर्मा जी।
पेन किलर, ईयर ड्रॉप्स, आई ड्रॉप्स, बस बाद में दूंगा।
अब उधार मना करने का। यह है शर्मिले शर्मा जी।
पेन किलर, ईयर ड्रॉप्स, आई ड्रॉप्स, बस बाद में दूंगा।
अब उधार मना करने का मन तो बहुत करता है, पर फाइनली शर्मा जी शर्मा जाते हैं। देखिए, अब इनका शर्माने का दवा तो कोई है नहीं, लेकिन उधार वापस लाने का फार्मूला है।
क्या? कैसे?
अरे वही खाता आउट करिए, खाता बुक डाउनलोड करिए, ये उधारी का रिमाइंडर भेजे और उधारी वापस लाए फटाफट।
माथुर के पैसे आ गए।
खाता बुक बिजनेस हुआ इजी।
For anyone who's introverted, who's uncomfortable asking for their credit, it's very hard to survive in the retail environment in India, right? And so therefore, if there is an app which actually sort of releases that pain for you, it's not just a functional benefit, right? It's such an emotional load which is taken out from your mind, right? And that is essentially what you want to do. You want to have a campaign that marries not just the distinctive product truth, but marries it to the emotional context of the user for the action to really happen, right? So those are the first two things that are very important when it comes to a launch communication. The third piece is actually something that again is very relevant in a competitive context. It is that you want to be breaking category codes. Now, what does category codes mean? It essentially means each category usually has a certain level of characteristics that are associated with the different campaigns that brands launch there, right? So so for instance, chewing gum ads look in a certain way, gaming ads look in a certain way, e-commerce ads look in a certain way, right? So there are certain category codes, category norms that come about because that's how consumers are responding well to a certain kind of campaign, right? So if you look at food tech, Swiggy's campaigns have set the category code. So anytime anyone now comes in, that is what the category code for food tech essentially looks like, right? And the thing is that category codes exist for a reason, because certain kinds of tonality work well for certain kinds of categories. So for instance, if you're healthcare, you can't really be doing sense of humor driven advertising. If you're education, then you can't be doing advertising which is very which is at least doing something which is slapstick humor driven or something like that. So in that sense, category codes exist for a reason. But when you have a new brand, your biggest goal is to make sure that people actually notice it and don't ascribe the ad to an existing brand. Don't think that this brand is like millions of other brands that already exist, which is why breaking category codes is the number one need, or is an essential need. I would say the number one need. There are 3 steps here, but it is also an essential need. If your ad looks exactly like every ad in the category looks, then you're in a little bit of trouble, right? And to give you a gold case example of a brand that sort of that sort of really transformed how brand communication was going to happen in category. I'm going to take Dollar Shave Club. It was a very small startup at that point compared to its key competitor in the US, which was, as you can imagine, Gillette. And about 5 years ago, I think 5-6 years ago, they launched the campaign that I'm going to show you. And if you've seen this, it's worth watching it one more time.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are f***ing great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler could use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis. And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, pop-up! Stop paying for shave tech you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
I know karate, I know jiu-jitsu and drive like a gangster when I'm coming to see you, see you, see you.
Okay, the reason I call this a $1 billion example is that Dollar Shave Club was bought by Unilever for, I kid you not, $1 billion about 3 years ago, if I remember correctly. And the reason that that they bought it was in large part because of the astronomical growth that the brand was going through at that point. Which in large part I think was driven by a campaign like that, right? You look at the Gillette campaigns, right? I mean, in India they might have Rahul Dravid, in the US they'll have a Federer, but essentially, you know, the tonality of the brand is not that different, and they have always been the preeminent leader in shaving for a substantial period of time. So when you're up against a brand like that, there is no point in trying to sell it the way that they are selling it. But at the same time, how much you can break the category code depends upon a little bit upon what kind of audience you're attracting at that point, and so on and so forth, right? And if you're someone who's less than 25 years of age, imagine the impact of this ad versus the ad that you typically see on television for Gillette, which would be for 30 seconds and would follow the classical model. It's not just that Dollar Shave Club is much cheaper than Gillette. Obviously, that is the case, but just the talk worthiness of this campaign years and years ago, and the irreverence that the brand has shown, there is no way that that kind of campaign essentially makes it very, very hard for a competitor to follow you, right? Every time you're a new brand, you're competing against much larger brands. And when you're competing against much larger brands, the best way to compete is to essentially use their strength against them, right? And it's what I call the jiu-jitsu move, because that's what you do in jiu-jitsu. You essentially try and use your enemy's strength, against themselves. And so when you're, let's say, Dollar Shave Club, and you're competing against these giants, they have a much broad-based audience. They can't create a campaign which is just intended for a young audience. They can't be as irreverent as they big brands by definition have to be consistent. And in a following session with Sambit, he'll talk a little bit about why brands have to be consistent, and how to what level they can customize and to what level they have to be consistent. But largely speaking, brands have to show a certain consistency in tonality, and that consistency makes them predictable, which means that once you know exactly, which means you know what they're going to do, and obviously it works for the audience, that's why they're doing it. But if you can find a chink in the armor for even a small percentage of the audience that can then grow into a much larger one, then that's something that that you can convert over a period of time to into a substantial advantage, right? And that is the, as the clock turns 8, that's the thought that I want to leave you with, which is that ideally you want to convert your opponent's advantages into disadvantages when you're a small brand. I wish I could be more specific. I'm happy to talk about more examples of how different brands have done that, but it is very context dependent for you to do it, right? The way Tinder approached it, the way Airbnb approached it, they're all very different examples, and they've all done it in their own ways in order to reach where they have. All right, I'm going to skip the media aspects. I'm going to summarize the craft tips for you, so that you can take a screenshot of this and you can keep this, keep this with you. If you want, we can talk a little bit more about these points. The media piece, I'll try and sort of cover on Instagram and YouTube, and that's something that you can sort of, YouTube, you can subscribe right here. Instagram, you can go to that link and follow us. It'd be great if I can get feedback on this session as well. Happy to take in more questions that are there, right? So while you're giving me feedback, let me read Harshvardhan's comment. The jiu-jitsu move will only work when your product is very unique to the competitors existing in that category, isn't it? What if your product only has a mild differentiating point? So the jiu-jitsu move becomes easy if you have a massive level of differentiation, but the thing is, even with a relatively mild differentiation, you can still in your communication stand out in a very substantial way, right? So the reason people will buy you is because you're able to convince them that mild differentiation is actually worth a lot. Otherwise, what is the reason for that mild differentiation to exist in the first place, right? So take the example of how till 2009 or 10 the milk food drinks category used to exist, right? Everyone was talking about taller, sharper, stronger, Horlicks. That's what it used to be. Bonvita used to be Tan Ki Shakti, Man Ki Shakti, and then follow-ups of that, right? So that's how the category was operating. Everyone was talking largely about how this is going to help people, help kids essentially grow faster. And then I think it was around 2010, if my memory serves me well, maybe it might have been a couple of years before that, when Bonvita launched Tayari Jeet Ki. Now, it's the same product that they were selling at that point, but the way that Tayari Jeet Ki was the way that campaign came about, it literally sort of took away the conversation from these simple ideas of taller, faster, stronger into a slightly more emotion driven campaign, which is that look, I'm a mother, I'm responsible for my child's growth, I'm going to make sure that I'm the kind of mother who goes all out to make sure that my child gets the best the best chance of success. And they told some really emotionally touching stories of how mothers were preparing their children for future, and Bonvita sort of fitted in as part of that. Now, Bonvita is not what you would typically call as a revolutionary product, but what that communication does is that it basically is a substantial delta over what everyone else has been talking, but it also ensures that a competitor now cannot follow in that similar tonality, because they were all doing one kind of communication, and then suddenly someone comes in with something else altogether, which is resonating with the audience. Now, once that is resonating with the audience, because Horlicks, was rooted in this thing of whatever they were doing, now they're forced into being consistent with that. and bit by bit, Bonvita actually gained a lot of share over the subsequent few years, right? And in fact, a lot of other brands tried to copy that tonality, but did not really succeed, because it was, it was a technique that suited Bonvita the best, because it was not a new brand at that point. It was a brand that everyone was aware of in any case, and they obviously did a little more performance kind of campaigns as well. I mean, they didn't use that word essentially, but it was really more immediate sales driven campaigns. But their brand campaigns just built that Tayari Jeet Ki concept day in and day out, right? And Horlicks couldn't follow them because they had gone into a different track. A new brand couldn't follow them, because when a new brand does it, and in fact, if you want, you should see the Milo India communication from a couple of years ago. It's a great piece of creative, but unfortunately, it looks a little bit too much like a Bonvita communication to the average user, right? There are strategic differences. Milo talks about sport as a means to getting stronger and so on and so forth, and Bonvita is all about winning. But just the kind of storytelling that was happening looked very similar in one case versus the other case to the average consumer who's not paying a lot of attention, right? And so even though Milo had succeeded with that same kind of communication in a bunch of countries in the south in Southeast Asia, and there, Milo's huge in Philippines and a bunch of other countries, in India that kind of communication didn't really gone through, because it wasn't rooted in any distinctive truth, which it can't be, because it's a highly emotion driven campaign, right? So it can be easy to do a jiu-jitsu move when you have a clear differentiator, but it is entirely possible to do it without it as well, and it works just as effectively. Okay, Rahul says, Cred targeted the elite class, people with good credit scores and maintained exclusivity, but aren't they diluting it by going to masses via IPL? I think they're still advertising a fair bit to people who have, at least, a lot of their spends, as far as I know, are going on digital. And on digital, you can identify people who are well off based on the signals that they're given, right? Obviously, the kinds of content you consume, the kinds of products that you buy, they are all giving signals to YouTube and Hotstar and all of these platforms where they're advertising. So in that sense, they are still trying as much as they can to tap into an audience which is quite which is quite premium. And then the exact communication itself, it doesn't dumb down. It's a fairly evolved communication. It's the kind of communication that an FMCG company would never do, because you're always talking to masses, and a lot of the times that when brands have done that, they haven't succeeded, because this kind of communication where it's not obvious exactly what the product is all about, when it leaves the consumer wondering, if they haven't heard of that before, they're not sure what it is. That kind of communication has rarely worked in India. Yeah, I have to go back to many decades to remember any communication which has worked of that kind in India. Maybe the It's Different campaign of sauces was a success, but it's a big exception in an otherwise fairly consistent show. So in that sense, by making the communication itself evolved, I think it sort of makes sure that that it doesn't dilute it. And then they have a mechanism where they approve all accounts. So it's not as if they're letting everyone else in. So I think the brand is very well protected, even by launching this campaign. Okay. Any other questions that I can address for you right now? All right. So thank you so much for joining in today, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the concepts that we discussed in today, and I look forward to seeing you again fairly shortly. Thank you, guys.